The crystal rang like a tiny bell when my father tapped his knife against the rim of his water glass, one bright, brittle chime that told the room to fall silent, and I knew, with the kind of certainty that lives in your bones, that he was about to announce the end of our family empire. I set down my fork, smoothed the skirt of my simple black dress, and looked up the length of the table at the man who had spent my entire life mistaking me for a shadow. He had no idea he'd already sold the company to me. My name is Sierra Hollis, 32, middle child of the Hollis line, and for most of my life the least visible person in a house where success arrived with engraved stationery and a catered lunch. We grew up in Greenwich, in a federal-style mansion with 10 fireplaces, a carriage house converted to a pool pavilion, and lawns that devoured the hours of 3 groundskeepers. From the road, it looked like a postcard for American achievement. Inside, it sounded like a board meeting that never adjourned. My grandfather, Edmund Hollis, built Hollisware in 1979, back when enterprise software was a rumor and warehouses still kept inventory on clipboards. He wrote the first version of the program himself in a back bedroom, printed the manual at a copy shop, and sold it door to hard-nosed plant managers who didn't believe in computers until they believed in his. When my father, Martin, took over in the mid-90s, he turned Granddad's miracle into a machine: sales teams, trade shows, glossy ads, acquisitions. Hollisware went from an 8-figure regional name to a national player with hundreds of employees and a reputation for reliability. At our table, reliability meant doing things the way Martin did them, and nobody did them louder than my older brother, Cole. He was the heir long before there was a will, handsome in that effortless, magazine-spread way, the kind of man who never met a door that didn't open for him. He floated through a communications degree, joined Hollisware the Monday after graduation, and was vice president of strategic partnerships by Friday. If Cole remembered the name of a single API, I never heard it. My younger sister, Aria, built a kingdom on screens. She curated a life with soft filters and coastal light linen shirts, sailing weekends, charity galas in borrowed gowns, and labeled it Hollis Heritage. She didn't know a subroutine from a submarine, but her follower count outpaced our server capacity. Then there was Mom, Vivian, who wore pearls the way soldiers wear medals. She smoothed conflict with more wine and gentler words. To her credit, she tried to interject on my behalf exactly twice in my childhood. Both times Dad gave her that look, and she folded the way napkins do. People like to tell stories about the one moment everything changed, as if life were a switch. Mine looked more like a small humiliation repeated until it hardened into a plan. At 22, fresh out of MIT with a double major in computer science and management, I built a prototype middleware platform that would let our legacy software talk to modern cloud services without ripping out our clients' entire infrastructure. It was the kind of bridge companies now pay fortunes to cross. I mapped out the architecture, the pricing, the adoption curve. I wrote a 40-page deck and annotated it with sticky flags so nobody would have to search for brilliance. It would lift its hand and introduce itself. Dad let me present at a board meeting as a courtesy. The men around that polished mahogany table had golfed with him for 2 decades and called him by his first name on magazine covers. I spoke for 10 minutes, long enough for my voice to settle into something confident, when his watch caught the light. He sighed. He raised his hand. "I think we've seen enough," he said, a smile pinned to his mouth like a paper badge. "Our clients value stability. This is ambitious. Not for us." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was paternal. It said, "Of course you have ideas. You're 22. It said, "Real money lives in the past." That night, sitting on the edge of my childhood bed surrounded by trophies nobody admired anymore, I bought a one-way ticket to Seattle and promised myself I would never again ask to be let in. The early years were as glamorous as fluorescent light. I rented a studio with windows that stuck in the frame and spent the first winter learning which walls stayed warm. I wrote code for other people's dreams at night and built my own during the day under a name that wouldn't mean anything to anyone, Meridian Arc. In contracts and on the few public filings I couldn't avoid, the founder was S, J. Marlowe, my first two initials, and my grandmother's maiden name spliced into a person nobody could trace. I ate a lot of noodles. I learned there are months when you can pay rent, payroll, or yourself, and you choose the first two. I learned that being underestimated is a currency if you're patient. People tell you truths when they're sure you can't afford to use them. Year 3. The prototype I'd pitched as a daughter became a product I sold as a stranger. We called it Straightabridge, a tunnel between yesterday's systems and today's clouds. One client turned into 3. 3 became 10. At 7 employees, I could have stopped feeling terrified. At 12, I made peace with terror as a coworker. Imani, who'd shared a paper-thin wall with me in our first building and had a laugh that made bad weeks blink, became my head of partnerships. Nadia, a cautious optimist with a spine of tungsten, joined as CFO and taught me how to read the silence at the end of a banker's sentence. We rented better space with windows that actually opened. I bought tiny plants that struggled and then learned to thrive. By our 8th year, Meridian Arc had quietly bought 2 boutique firms that made our platform sing. Most of our revenue came from enterprise clients who regarded S.J. Marlowe as a reclusive founder with an unerring sense for legacy pain points. We didn't sponsor galas. We didn't give long interviews. We built. In all those years, the Hollis family and I practiced a kind of choreography. I flew home for weddings and occasional holidays, smiled at the butler who still snuck me cookies, and told my parents I was consulting. Dad never asked for details anymore. He'd already filed me in a drawer marked theoretical. It suited me fine. I'd love to say I never thought of him. That would be a lie. I thought of him the way climbers think of gravity, as a force to work around, not with. 2 autumns ago, I started paying closer attention to Hollisware's public filings. There it was in ink, stalled R&D, shrinking margins, client churn described as short-term. I read the lines and the white space between them. Old code had become a maze nobody wanted to enter. The few engineers who still knew the map were aging out. Meanwhile, the golden heir wore new cufflinks to quarterly meetings and signed off on vendor invoices with cheerful ignorance. I didn't want my father to fail. That's another lie I could tell to make myself sound big-hearted. The truth is meaner and cleaner. I wanted him to need the solution he told me wasn't real. We built a plan with the precision of an operation you only run once. Meridian Arc acquired quiet positions in 2 of Hollisware's largest suppliers and both of its biggest clients through shell entities with names so bland they were invisible. We tested the edges of Hollisware's contracts, learned where they bent and where they might break. Then I sent an anonymous proposal under a placeholder we used for sensitive approaches, Project Northwind. It offered a partnership, capital, technology, time. Keep the Hollis name. Keep the veneer. Modernize the bones. Dad rejected it after the first paragraph. Nadia forwarded his reply with a single line. He didn't even scroll. Fine, I told her, watching rain stripe the glass in my office. We buy it outright. On the merits? Nadia asked, already calculating. And on principle, I said, surprised to hear how steady that sounded. We built the offer so clean that any board with a duty to reality would take it. $50 million in cash. Retain most of the workforce. Smooth their debt and preserve their brand for now. It came from Meridian Arc Holdings with us, J. Marlowe too busy to attend any meeting where someone might study their face. The board accepted. Of course they did. The numbers told a story that wasn't personal. The timing, well, I didn't pick Thanksgiving to be dramatic. I picked it because even in families built like fortresses, everyone sits down at the same table once or twice a year. The Tuesday before the holiday, I flew into White Plains on a charter I almost never used. All morning I'd been reading papers I'd dreamed about since I was 22. Signatures, transfer schedules, lists of systems that would soon belong to me in that dry legal way that says, "This is yours now." A car idled at the bottom of the stairs with the heat running and a driver who used my alias politely. I told him to wait in the circular drive. I needed to walk up the front steps by myself. The door swung open before I knocked. Mom smelled like expensive soap and Sauvignon Blanc and hugged me a second longer than usual. "You look different," she said, pulling back to study my face. "Is that a new watch?" Something like that, I said. She guided me through the foyer with its framed magazine covers about Dad, the staircase like a river of wood, the rug in the hall that muffled the household's life. Your father's in his study, very busy with some big deal, she said. He's hardly come up for air. Of course, I replied. I'll say hello. His study was the same as it had been since childhood. Heavy curtains, leather chairs, books in dark jackets that had never been cracked. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old victories. I knocked once. Then I went in. For a heartbeat, he looked pleased to see me. Then he remembered who I was to him. A brief hug, a gesture toward the visitor's chair. How was your flight? On time, I said. I flew direct. Commercial. He reached for a pen without really hearing the answer. Private. I let it land. Not to wound. To be seen. He blinked. Well, holiday week. His phone lit. He picked it up with the relief of a man saved by a bell. Excuse me, he said, already turned half away. He spoke low and happy about term sheets and escrow and our friends at Meridian Arc. While he talked, he slid a folder across the desk, almost thoughtlessly, and I saw the Meridian logo I'd personally approved embossed on the corner. When he hung up, he gathered the papers as if I were the person most likely to smudge them. Big things happening, he said, puffed with a boy's excitement. Complicated, you know. Not your kind of thing. Of course, I said, and smiled because it cost me nothing now. Upstairs, my old room had been frozen in amber. Debate medals. A poster from a high school hackathon. My first ugly HTML prints, still pinned above a desk too small for the person who now stood in front of it. I washed my hands, changed my blouse, and went back down in time to be met in the living room by Cole at 3 p.m. with a tumbler in his hand. Look what the Pacific dragged in, he announced, grinning. Still, programming? Or whatever. You must be bored out of your mind. So bored, I said mildly, and let my gaze rest on the woman he draped an arm around. She was all smooth hair and careful smile. Lena, introduced to me as a wellness consultant, which I guessed meant she was good at knowing which $40 smoothies returned dividends when posted from the right rooftop. Arya swept in next, phone held up for the perfect angle, calling me her mysterious sister to an audience of people who knew me as a supporting character in her weekly Heritage reel. She air-kissed me and said, "You look expensive," like it was a compliment none of us should admit we enjoyed. The first hour dragged exactly as I remembered. Dad floated in and out on silent shoes, checking his phone, texting like a teenager. Mom floated, period, flustered, anxious to talk about anything other than the way Dad couldn't stop smiling at a screen. Staff moved through the kitchen like chess pieces, one step ahead of need. The house itself held its breath. When we finally filed into the dining room, it looked like the cover of a magazine the neighbors all subscribed to. Candles in silver holders. China that made soup taste like memory. Arya narrated for the first part of the salad course until Mom shot her a look even Arya obeyed. The table glittered down its length. Dad sat at one end. Mom took the other. Cole had the seat at Dad's right. I'd been placed opposite Mom, near the door, the way you put the employee you're fond of but unsure about. There was a ritual where we went around and said what we were grateful for. It used to mean something, back before gratitude turned into a press release. Cole thanked his incredible year, a yacht with a name he said twice, and new ventures, which I knew meant old habits with fancier invoices. Arya thanked her community and a makeup sponsorship and being born with our last name. Mom thanked family because what else was she supposed to say to keep the peace? When it was my turn, I said, I'm grateful for work that keeps me honest, friends who told me hard truths when I needed them, and the kind of rejection that turns out to be a door. Dad lifted his glass for the speech he always gave. To legacy, he said, and looked down the table at me to make sure I understood I didn't belong in that word. He set the glass down, tapped his knife to the crystal just once more, and stood. I have an announcement, he said, voice ringing with command. Hollisware will be sold tomorrow morning. Cole coughed on his drink. Arya filmed the shock like a headline. Mom's smile cracked. The buyer is a private firm called Meridian Arc, Dad continued. They've offered a strong valuation at a moment when the industry is, well, Let's say complicated. This is the right move. Cole flushed. You can't be serious. It's done, Dad said. Our attorneys have signed off. It positions the family for what? Arya demanded. My entire brand is built on being Dad held up a hand. There will be a foundation, he said. Your mother and I will fund it with a portion of the proceeds. The rest we'll handle it. The room rang with overlapping indignations. When it finally fell quiet enough to hear the clock in the hall, I put down my fork and asked the only question I wanted the answer to in front of everyone. Who's the buyer? I said. Meridian Arc, Dad repeated. He smiled the smile he saved for enemies he'd beaten. Run by a very private founder, S. J. Marlowe. We've been negotiating for months. I felt my pulse steady. Beat, beat, beat. I'm S. J. Marlowe, I said. Silence doesn't usually have weight. This one did. The table bowed under it. Cole's glass tipped. Red wine bled through the linen toward the silver. Arya froze with her phone in midair, her broadcast full of the sound of her own breath. Mom reached for her glass, found it empty, set it back down with precision to pretend she hadn't looked. Dad laughed, then realized no one else did. He looked at me, not through me for once, but at me, and his face did the math. His mouth shaped the word no without making sound. I slid a business card across the linen. It was matte black, heavy enough to be a tiny plaque. The name printed on it in clean white letters hadn't been said aloud in this house until now. He didn't pick it up. He didn't have to. It's a very good deal, I said, because facts had always been my best weapon. You get more cash than the market would give you if you took this public. Your people keep their jobs. Your clients don't panic. You get to call it your idea. This is a trick, Dad said. A performance. You're what? Some kind of figurehead for a fund. Dad, I said gently, you didn't believe my architecture when I drew the diagrams. I don't expect you to believe my title when I hand it to you on cardstock. But it's true. Meridian is mine. Cole found his voice first. You've been spying. On public filings? I raised an eyebrow. On industry news? On the company I grew up in, which forgot to change its admin passwords for 2 years running. His face went pale, then blotchy. That's illegal. It's not, I said, and watched a muscle jump in Dad's cheek. If it makes you feel better, your security failures didn't hurt you. Your leadership did. Dad planted both hands on the table. This deal is off. It was finalized an hour ago, I said. The release goes out at 9 a.m. Your board voted unanimously. Your council called it a prudent exit. I brought their memo with me because I knew you'd ask. You came here to humiliate me, he said. No, I said. I came so you wouldn't have to read about it in the papers like a stranger. And because Thanksgiving 10 years ago is when you announced Cole's vice presidency after telling me I wasn't qualified to run a team, I wanted to add, but didn't. You can be elegant when you don't need points. Arya lowered her phone. For once, there was no filter she could slide over the moment to make it prettier. So, she said finally, very small, you're a boss. For a while, I said. Until we restructure. Dad's chair scraped back. He didn't throw it. He'd never ruin furniture. He walked out, footsteps sharp, office door thundering shut a second later like a book slamming on a chapter. Cole stood in the doorway a beat later, jaw tight. You've made a mistake, he announced. You won't be able to run it. You don't know the people. You don't know that I know about Ocean View Consulting, I said, tired and sharper than I meant to be. The shell you used to build a company for services that never existed. $312,000 in the last 18 months, mostly tagged as sponsorships. I also know your bookie's name. He's sloppy. He blanched. You can't prove any, I can, I said. I won't if you resign quietly, repay what you took over time, and attend the graduate program of your choice before you apply for any job anywhere near my payroll. You'd do that to your brother? I'd do that to someone who stole from my company, I said. Him being my brother means he gets a softer landing. He stared at me with a kind of hatred that felt disconcertingly like grief. This isn't over, he said. It is, I said, and closed my door softly after he left. Arya knocked next, mascara repaired, posture readjusted. She perched on the edge of my old desk as if she'd sat there 1,000 times instead of never. So you're, like, a secret billionaire, she said. Not a billionaire, I said, amused in spite of myself. Not even close. Close enough that your shoes have secrets, she said, eyeing the leather I'd chosen for comfort over status. Look, I know everyone thinks my job is fake because I hold a phone for a living, but I know how to tell a story about a brand that people believe. If you want the world to accept Hollis Ware powered by Meridian without panic, I can help. We can make this a redemption arc, not a coup. I don't do coups, I said, then stopped because of course I did. I do turnarounds. Even better, she said. People love a comeback. Make me a title that doesn't sound like decoration and I'll earn it. I looked at her, the sister I had rolled my eyes at for a decade, and saw, for the first time, the way she turned attention into momentum. Brand partnerships, I said slowly. Consumer-facing. If we ever build anything with a dashboard farmers could love, you'll launch it. She beamed. I knew you saw me, she said, and the fact that she needed that sentence landed somewhere old in me. The last person I expected knocked after midnight. Mom had traded her dress for a sweater and the kind of soft pants women are told not to wear in front of men like my father. She looked at the room like it was a museum, then at me like I'd stepped out of the frame. I kept this exactly the same, she said lamely. In case you came back. I did, I said, because kindness costs less than retaliation and buys more. Look at me. She sat on the window seat where she'd read to me about girls who built machines when I was small, and she still believed books could change the world. He's wounded, she said. I don't say that to make you feel guilty. I say it because I've never seen him that way. I know, I said. He thought he was selling to a stranger. He still is. He doesn't know me. That's my fault too, she said, very quietly. I thought I was keeping peace. What I was keeping was silence. We sat with that for a while. It didn't fix anything. It didn't have to. Breakfast at 7? She asked. He'll want to talk before the papers call. I nodded. Tell him I'll meet him in the study. At 7 on the dot, I walked into the room where I'd been told to be smaller and took up more space than the visitor's chair would allow. Dad was standing by the window, the paper already on his desk, face in black and white next to the headline about the sale he hadn't authored. My attorneys say the deal is airtight, he said. Of course it is. You hired good ones. I did, I said. You did too. They must be relieved you listened to them for once. He let that pass. What do you want, Sierra? He asked, using my name the way some men use a weapon. Truth. I said. I want to modernize what Granddad felt without torching his name to do it. That means we keep Hollis on the door for now, Hollis Meridian. We migrate your clients to current architecture with an actual plan. We remove a layer of management that exists solely to make certain men feel taller in hallways. We fund new R&D with real engineers and give them a roadmap that isn't a prayer. And me? He didn't quite spit it. He also didn't say, your father. Chairman Emeritus, I said. An advisory office. No operational authority. Full benefits. A first-name relationship with the clients who still love you. The chance to turn wisdom into something more useful than nostalgia. He laughed once, ugly and honest. A museum piece. A docent, I said, with a keycard. He looked at me as if deciding whether I had earned my face. What about Cole? He pays back what he took, I said. He resigns today. He can go to school or go to ground. Up to him. And Arya? She has a job if she wants it. She's smart in a language you never learned. He let out a breath he might have been holding for 10 years. How did you do it? He asked finally, to the glass more than to me. Without this name. Without me. I had your father's stubbornness, I said, and a problem to solve. That's enough for a while. He turned from the window. The light caught the lines that work and certainty had carved into his face. You wanted to prove me wrong. At first, I said. Now I want something bigger than that. Proving you wrong is a small life. He flinched, not because the sentence was cruel, but because it was fair. I thought I was protecting you, he said, repeating the fairy tale he'd told himself for 2 decades. This world is hard on women who want to lead. You made it harder, I said, not unkindly. I learned anyway. Something shifted in him then. It wasn't surrender. He doesn't do that. It was an adjustment, like a lens catching focus. He extended his hand, the one I'd seen enclose 100 deals and photos. Then let's lead, he said. I took it because I'd earned it. I said. The release hit at 9 a.m. Eastern. Phones buzzed like hornets. Reporters called every number Nadia had carefully prepared them to call. Arya posted a video in a quiet voice about evolution that made our servers dip for a minute from the traffic it drove to our new landing page. The staff gathered in the atrium of Hollisware headquarters, soon to be Hollis Meridian, and listened while I introduced myself with the name I'd kept hidden on purpose. I'm Sierra, I said, from a temporary podium they'd pulled out of a closet. I wrote my first line of code upstairs in a room that smelled like printer ink. Today I'm asking you to do what this company has always done at its best, take something that works and make it better. It sounded a little corny. It also sounded true. The 6 months that followed were the busiest of my life. Integration plans look elegant in slide decks. In practice, they're 100 knots you tie without looking away. We reduced the senior leadership tier by a third with severance packages that made sense and NDAs that protected us from public tantrums. We promoted people with grease under their nails. We gave a team of mid-career engineers who had almost given up a clear charter and a budget. We learned which clients needed a bouquet and which needed blunt honesty. Arya rebuilt the company's public voice around the heart of what we actually do, fix invisible problems in ways people can feel. Dad surprised me. He showed up. He kept the hours he'd always demanded of others. He walked through the building with someone from new product on his right and someone from old-school client relations on his left and translated both languages. He told the story of Edmund's first install at a factory that made cardboard boxes and made half the floor tear up, then ended with a joke about printers chewing paper that made the other half laugh. He sent me 3 articles a week I didn't have time to read, and then 1 note, handwritten, that I did. Cole sputtered. Then he enrolled in a night program at a business school that prides itself on humbling men like him. He called me twice with questions that didn't have shortcuts and listened when I didn't give him any. He paid his first month back on time. Mom put down the wine during daylight most days and joined a board that funds scholarships for girls who want to study computer science in places where men in studies still laugh. She wore fewer pearls and more pride. She apologized once in a hallway without witnesses and cried into my shoulder in the pantry where the cookie tins live. I cried too. Then we washed our faces and went back to work. I still split my weeks between Seattle and Connecticut, though now the flights feel less like self-exile and more like commute. Imani and Nadia tease me about wearing shoes that can do both boardrooms and data center floors. The new lobby at Hollis Meridian has a timeline along one wall, an old receipt from Edmund's first sale, a photograph of Dad holding a punch card in a way that pretends he knew what it did, and a still from the day we announced the merger. There's a frame with my name in it now. It's not larger than theirs. It's exactly the same size. We did Thanksgiving again this year. Smaller. Quieter. No speeches. We ate in the kitchen, where the good light is, with our elbows on the table and no phones out. Arya brought rolls she baked herself. Cole brought a pie he bought and didn't lie about. Dad carved the turkey without looking over his shoulder to see who was filming. Mom insisted we each say 1 sentence about something we found difficult this year and 1 thing we were proud of. Mine were the same. This, I said, and didn't have to explain whether I meant the company, the family, or the way I now took up space in both. I didn't get the father I thought I wanted. I got something still forming that might one day be better. A colleague who learned to say, I was wrong, without dying of it. A grandfather to some child who hasn't been born yet who will hear him talk about legacy in a way that includes daughters in the definition. People love to say success is the best revenge. It's not. Success is loud and fleeting. The best revenge is building something so useful that even the person who doubted you has to stand inside it and admit it holds. If you're listening because you've spent years at a table where your ideas are treated like dessert, nice if there's room, let me tell you the part no one puts on plaques. Leaving doesn't feel like triumph when you slam the door. It feels like walking out into weather and not knowing if you've got a coat. It feels like sitting in an apartment that smells like someone else's dinner and making promises to yourself about rooms that don't exist yet. It feels like work so ordinary it'd be boring if it weren't building you. And then, one day, You'll sit down at a table you were once placed at the edge of, and you'll take the head seat without asking if you're allowed. Someone will tap a knife against crystal. There will be a chime. You'll feel the old anger rise, and you'll meet it with something new. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just a steadiness that says, I am here. You'll make decisions about the thing you love. You'll make mistakes. You'll fix them. You'll stop keeping score and start keeping time. I still keep the card that says S, J, Marlowe in my wallet. Not because I need it. Because it reminds me that the person nobody sees is sometimes the person who builds the room. On a clear weeknight in early winter, after the last integration milestone for the quarter shipped and the building exhaled, I took the long way out through the lobby and stood in front of that timeline. A young engineer I barely know stopped beside me, hands in his pockets, gaze tilted up at Granddad holding that punch card like a map. Crazy, he said. How things change. Or don't, I said. We still count. We just count differently. He nodded like I'd said something wise and went toward the glass doors, toward air that bit your lungs and made you feel alive. I watched him turn his collar up and disappear into the night. Then I looked at my grandfather's photograph again, and my father's and mine, all in a neat, even line, and thought, now. And then I turned off the lights and went home.